welcome to Kestryl and Company. I'm glad you could join us. Today we're going to be talking about families, pagan families, and how they develop. And today I have a 3 generations worth of a particular family, Rosemary Koyman and her daughter Kathleen Egbert and her son, the elf on the floor, Larry. A lot of people will know that traditionally Wicca is a family faith that's taught from generation to generation to generation to generation. That's not quite how your family worked it out.
No, we just sort of came at it individually from different ways. I was living in Detroit, I was living here in D.C. I started all the way back in Detroit. Kathleen moved down to Texas and sort of picked up on it there.
Well, I started reading a lot when I was living in Detroit. She was on the east side, and I was on the west side. And Detroit is geographically a very large city. So it was almost like living in 2 different cities. And we didn't consult each other about it, and I just started reading about astrology, and then I had a friend who introduced me to tarot. And as Mom mentioned, I really got into knowing more about things and finding people of like mind when I moved down to Texas, which struck me as kind of strange because I always thought of that as the Bible Belt.
It is the Bible Belt.
It was odd. I had been, let's face it, I grew up in the traditional years where one did not speak of anything other than Christianity. The pagan faith during the 40s and 50s was still pretty much underground and didn't start coming out in this country until quite a few years later. And I had gone through several religions trying to find out where I fit in and finding I didn't fit in anywhere. Trying to bring the kids up the best you could, trying to fit them into some sort of religion where none of us really fit. And it was very interesting to find out that Kathleen had taken her path and I had taken my path the other way. I had gone to a Wayne County Community College, was an inner city school, and I had an anthropology class where we really explored many of the different aspects of the inner city, and non-traditional faiths was one of the things that was very important. And I realized that I had wasted, well, not really wasted, because it gave me a good grounding, but I had tried to be Christian when I really wasn't. And when I became pagan, we found a place where we all fit.
And it's interesting because based on her raising me Catholic, as a matter of fact, I decided that in this country, Christianity was the dominant religion, and my children should get a good founding in Christianity, so I sent them to CCD classes. And I find out years later, Larry had a tendency to skip out of his CCD classes and take a walk in the woods. It's your turn to pick up.
Yeah, I would skip out of CCD classes, and there was this old man basically on the mountaintop type thing where there was some woods up by the class. And I would go up there and he would teach me all he knew about the herbs and plants and birds and creatures and things like that, and about the magical energies. While Mom thought I was in class learning about Jesus and God and all that sort of things.
All the saints. And
yeah, I never told her because I figured she'd say, "Oh no, you can't do that. You have to go to CCD."
She'd have been mad.
She would have been mad.
My whole thing was that I did want him to have a good grounding in the dominant religion in this country before I let him make his own choice. And he was making his choice even as I thought he was getting his grounding, which it was an informed choice, and that's what was important. And he, I think, has been happy ever since, finding his own way.
I think that's important for all parents, is that they let their children make their own choice when the time comes. I think spirit enters into everyone's life at a different point. I know children that haven't been involved with spirit until they were 16, 17, 25, and
35,
and
40.
35, 40. But there are children that are, 3 or 4 years old. They want to know about God, and they want to know about, all the various stuff, and they want explanations that make sense.
Right.
One nice thing about the three of us being the same but different is in circle. Kathleen and I tend to write a lot of the circles that we do, a lot of the rituals. And Larry sticks his 2 cents worth in periodically. And I think we get a much richer, much more balanced ritual than if just one of us was doing it from one point of view.
Yeah, because I have a tendency to be too dry, too much the professor. And Mom likes the lyrical, flowing things. And so I put in the basis of it, the nutshell, and then she massages it into something a little prettier. And Larry comes up with some really inspirational things now and then.
I've been to some of your circles. They're pretty interesting.
Yeah, thank you.
Quite the conglomeration. I think that just speaks for your entire family, though.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that I've admired about your family, Rosemary, is that I haven't met a single member of your family, whether they were children you raised or just people that were in your extended family, that weren't just specific, very specific individuals.
Thank you. We strive. We try. I
think,
don't like carbon copies. I think when the kids were little, if they didn't ask questions, I wasn't doing my job. And Kathleen's carried this on, except Larry gets whopped every now and then.
I think all kids have a few lumps on their head, You're asking the wrong question at the wrong time.
Right, more the wrong time than the wrong question. Sometimes he's been known to ask a very good and perceptive question, but loudly and at the wrong time. Like when we were in church for his grandfather's funeral, his paternal grandfather's funeral, and he was a little tyke, about 4 or 5.
Oh, geez, that one.
And he piped up and said, "When are they going to flush grandfather?"
Well, you see,
He had a lot of fish.
They'd had goldfish and tropical fish, and it made sense to him.
That's one of the things that children, I think, are famous for, is catching the adults with their proverbial pants down.
It's
And
much
I
more
think
fun that way.
I think all children do it. I know my 4-year-old. We were in a mall one day, and I was shopping for, I don't remember, tights or something, and we were in ladies' lingerie, and all of a sudden she just piped up at the top of her little 4-year-old lungs and said, "Mom, there's some really ugly people shopping today."
Oh, my.
Yeah.
What I know that tradition has its place in paganism, and it's wonderful for some people, and that's the structure that they need. What have the three of you found to be the best and worst points of being an eclectic generational pagan family?
The best of it is that we can talk to each other, and that I'm fishing for a word. We respect each other's thoughts. We respect where we're coming from. Oh, we have a lot of fights. We argue and this, and no, I don't want to do it that way. But we do. We can understand that everyone needs a point of view. I speak from the matriarchal line. Now, Kathleen probably will contradict me and say, "No, you don't let me talk at all."
Mine comes out of the typewriter.
Yes, ma'am.
What I like is, since we don't have a specific tradition, we're free to borrow from all. Some people call it plagiarism. I just call it borrowing.
Well, isn't it true that the highest form of compliment is to copy?
Right.
Indeed, and
I have seen some really great parts of rituals, and have tried to incorporate them into ours. And I'm sure we're better for it. And I feel that if we were in a very structured group, we might not have that opportunity.
What are some of the things you feel are important as a young person in paganism right now?
As a young person, being able to say, this is the path that I want to follow, and getting respect for it. There's a lot of people out there who, about my age, who think that the religion that they were raised in is not what they want, but they don't want to hurt their parents' feelings, so they stick with that religion, and they just get more depressed with it all the time, instead of saying, well, let me look for another way, and hopefully my parents will understand this is the religion I want. So being able to basically say, this is who I am, to my parents and grandparents is probably the best part about it.
You're lucky to have that freedom.
Yeah, I am.
You know, it's funny the way our family worked out. I have 3 children. Kathleen has, and I have found our path. My middle daughter really doesn't have a path.
She's a druid.
Yeah,
She said so.
closer to that than anything else. This is true. And my son is raising a family in a very Catholic tradition. And we get together, and we may or may not talk about what we believe in, but there's respect there. We have the option to do what we feel is right for us.
That's a luxury that I know a lot of people don't have. I've had a particular problem in that I do teach a public class. And I have young people, 15, 16, 17 years old, who want to come and study with me.
Mm-hmm.
And I legally have a problem being able to teach them if
Yes.
they cannot talk to their parents.
When we lived in Texas, I had an open door policy. And my children were frequently I had half a dozen children at any one time. And many of them were questioning their religion, their religious views, and would bring to me, well, so-and-so said this. And then they left it up to me to apply logic and common sense to what they were told to try to come to, well, this is why they said it. And I never tried to tell those children, young people really, what they should believe. I just tried to help them feel out what they wanted to believe and tried to wipe off the mask, slip the hyperbole, as you will, from the religions that were being forced down their throats, whatever it was. And because I never tried to force anything, I think that's why we had so many people in and out all the time.
Well, I think that's one of the things that I try very hard to do when I have students that come to me. I don't just teach them how to cast a circle and these are your elements and these are the symbols for those elements and this is, this is what you sprinkle and this is what you sense. And I try and teach them comparative religion.
Yes.
Because if
Yeah.
you don't teach comparative religion everywhere you go, all the people are going to know are their differences. They're never going to understand that if we cut away all of that liturgy and the hype and the symbols, it's all the same basic stuff.
My husband likes to liken religion to a basic organizational chart. He said in your organizational chart you have boxes, and at the top is the CEO, and then there's various presidents, and under them vice presidents. And he pointed out that all religions are basically the same, it's just that the names in the boxes change. And I think, I believe that. Also, of course, what they do is sometimes a little different. I'm more comfortable with what I do than some of the other things that are being done.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think in a country where our country is supposedly supposed to be built on freedom of choice, I think that a lot of times that freedom of choice is denied, especially to the young people, because parents do not give credit to the children that, yes, even at the age of 2, 3, 4 years old, they may not speak our language as clearly as we do, but that doesn't mean they don't understand, and it doesn't mean they don't have questions.
I think, too, that a pagan parent owes it to their child to at least give them some sort of idea and grounding in, let's face it, what is our state religion.
Oh, I completely agree.
We are a Judeo-Christian country, and there's no way of denying it. And if they don't know how the other half lives, so to speak, they're going to find it very difficult growing up and going through high school and grade school. Kids can be just murderous.
Oh, yes.
Another important thing she mentioned, not only kids being murderous, but high school. There's been a lot said about how young people coming right out of high school are probably more prepared to vote intelligently than their elders. Well, I think the same goes because they do have the civics courses and they do have a lot of history courses. I think the same goes with saying that someone who's basically at the end of his sophomore year in high school is prepared to decide what he knows about the world and should be allowed, without being pushed by a parent or guardian, to choose his own path.
I think that politically children are very well educated when they come right out of high school. However, I have noticed that although it's getting better in some of the high school anthropology courses, you're starting to come up with some history of religion. There are still a lot of things that are left out.
Oh, yes.
I mean, I just recently did help to do an article for Christian Magazine last summer, and when they finished, they gave the impression that pagans were out to overturn patriarchal Christian society and all of politics the way we saw it today, and that's all there was to it. And by the way, congratulations, every pagan is a radical feminist. And I'm going,
I beg your pardon, excuse me.
Did I get anything across here? You know, because I try very hard to let people know that, you know, although there are some radicals in paganism, just like there are radicals in Christianity or Judaism, you know, most of us are pretty laid back, pretty normal, level-headed people who do think with a fairly logical brain. And, you know, if you can present us with a better, you know, give us a better mousetrap, we'll look at it.
We'll steal it.
Capitalize on it.
fact, to be a pagan requires a lot more thought and a lot more sense of self-worth than to blindly follow in a church's lead and lifestyle. And I think that does scare some people because you have to take responsibility for yourself and what you think and believe.
That's just what I was going to say. Yeah. Paganism requires you to be responsible for your actions. And many of the other religions don't. Somebody else is responsible. You're merely sorry.
But I'm really happy that paganism does require this responsibility because back when I was Christian, of course, I had a good excuse whenever I was bad. The devil made me do it. But when I was good, that was God's work. Now when I'm bad, it's my fault, but also when I'm good, it's my joy.
Right.
And I get the credit, and that's nice.
Yeah, it is. And I think that also one of the things I really enjoy about a lot of pagan parents is that they do raise their children from the time they're, you know, grabbing grapes off the altar during the ritual, that they have that sense of self, that sense of self-responsibility, and they don't have as much of a tendency to go and, you know, poke their next door neighbor in the ribs and say, "God, you're just an ugly human being." You know, they tend to more celebrate, "Wow, you're an individual."
And they don't need drugs and alcohol. I have met quite a few pagan youngsters, and I have never met one with an alcohol problem or people who started paganism as youngsters, that is, not people who came to it after their problems. And usually the paganism seems to end their problems. But as I was saying, I've never met a pagan teenager yet who has a drug or alcohol problem.
I've also met a lot of pagan teenagers who have a much more educated and adult, I guess a lot of people would say, view on sexual issues, with AIDS and sexual disease being so prevalent in today's society. For as promiscuous as paganism is supposed to be, I know an awful lot of pagan teenagers who are choosing to abstain.
Right.
And they're learning, if they don't abstain, that at least they have the self-respect to have safe sex.
Exactly.
And
don't leave it to the other guy.
And don't leave it to the other guy.
Yeah,
it's got to
my
be your responsibility, because if you
right.
don't, you're taking your life in your hands. You know.
Larry, what you said is, you said you know one
Yeah, I know
And
one.
you know, there's always there's a rule
The
in
exception
life,
that proves
and
the
that's,
rule,
that's
yes.
it, the exception that proves the rule. So that if you only know one out of all the pagans, that's pretty good, isn't it?
Well, 2 or 3 anyway.
There are, I think that you know, a lot of people want to attribute drug and alcohol problems to a religion or to their heredity or to, you know, this, that, and the other thing. I think that even if pagan kids or even pagan adults do fall into that, once they get past the initial problem and they get to the point where they realize, okay, I've got a problem, I need to get some help.
Yeah.
They've got their HP, they've got their higher power to go to, and it's not one that's going to say, you were bad, too bad,
Gee,
guy.
I thought you meant high priestess.
Well, you know, that too. That too. You know, I think that's one of the things I really, really love about paganism is that for the most part, not always, but for the most part, we tend to be a fairly much a big family.
Yeah, this is true.
And we have just as many sibling rivalries and just as many arguments and just as many, Grandma did this to me.
Oh, don't we?
How could you say that?
Gee, I don't know where I got that idea. But I think that the more that we celebrate the individual, both in the family and in the faith, the better off we're going to be.
I
think
like our
that's-
celebrations. I really enjoy going outside and saying, golly, the moon is full. Thank you, lady. We're glad you're here. And if it's a cloudy night, say, well, gee, we're sorry. We know you're there with us, and we'll see you next time around.
My 4-year-old did an interesting thing the other day. We were on the highway at night. She looked out the back of the car and she goes, Mom, the mama moon is following us. I said, oh, why is she doing that? Well, because she loves us. And I said, well, why's that? Well, because we're all her kids, of course. And this is my 4-year-old.
Yeah.
I'm going, okay.
Good grounding there somewhere.
Yeah. What do you think are some of the maybe more difficult, I don't want to say negative, but more difficult things that come along when you clash horns? And not just necessarily within your family, but when you clash horns with, say, the more traditional paths.
One of the biggest problems is being accepted where you work. More pagans are closet pagans at work than they are anywhere else. And it's a shame that this is required. Or it's a shame that the perception is that it's required. I fortunately have not had any big problems. I'm very open. I answer questions and do the best I can to give the true picture of what a pagan and what pagan beliefs are. Do I do tarot? No, I don't. Do I do runes? Yes, I do runes. Do I see in a crystal ball? No. The only thing I've ever seen in a crystal ball is a table it's sitting on. I don't scry. We do this, some of us do this, and some of us do that. And it's difficult. It's very difficult for some people, particularly the younger you are, the more you
Right.
feel the pressure at work.
Because you have so much more to lose.
Yes.
At this time in my life, no one can take my kids away from me. I'd be glad to get rid of them. But
Well, you've got one almost.
right.
Almost.
the first one's gone. She's having a very nice life by herself. But unfortunately, a cult gets bad press generally. And
1,400 years or more of bad press.
yes. And things are labeled a cult when they're not necessarily a cult. A cult, as we all know, only means hidden, but they're really perverted people doing strange things and using a cult as a way to try to validate it. And so we get the bad press, and therefore young people with children have to worry
Yes.
I
about,
think that's a terminology confusion,
Yeah, it is.
occult as opposed to cult.
yes.
And, you know, one of the
But
things
not
that I-
many, some people don't make the distinction, though,
Oh, sure.
Kestryl. That's
Well,
what.
as I-
Unfortunately, in the you were talking about the clash, And unfortunately, too many ministers out there don't try to make that distinction. And I've talked to a lot of young people who, we have a very, unfortunately, divorce-prone society here. And in a divorce, if one person is pagan and the other one goes back to Judeo-Christianity or one of the accepted religions, there is all too frequently a move to take the children away from that evil parent.
In order to close on kind of a positive note, and also because I'm very firmly of the belief that whatever happens with spirituality and with the world in general is in the hands of the young people, what do you feel is the most important thing to tell people your age about how to deal if they find that they aren't in a family that they find themselves in a situation that might not be as easy for them as some?
What could I tell them? Make the best choice you can, and if it hurts your family members, don't tell them. Keep it a secret until they're ready to accept that you are who you are.
Or until you're old enough to get out of the
Or
house.
until you're old enough to get out of the house. And then you can always tell them later, like, hey, by the way, I'm a pagan.
I think that it's important that freedom of choice be the most important thing, that we, regardless of whether our children end up being what we are, I mean, there's a lot of pagans who have nightmares of, oh, my child's going to be a Christian yuppie, I just know.
I have one. It's not all bad.
It's not all bad. Just celebrate the individual, and I think
Certainly.
that's the best bet. Thank you all for joining me,
You're
and I
welcome.
hope
I've
you'll come
enjoyed
and
it,
join us
Kestryl.
again.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, my audience, for joining us, and I hope you'll join us again for Kestryl and Company. Blessed be.